Duarte, thanks very much again already for a nice presentation. I definitely will be a nice presentation knowing you. Please.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to see some long-time friends, as it happens in the University of Amsterdam, and to continue our collaborations, long-standing collaborations that we have been all over these years. Today my talk is really that, a talk. It's about exposing an idea and some evidences related with it, but it's more to discuss a little bit this idea of how skill is formed that I would like to address. Let me just increase the size of this. Yeah. So this is why it is called the origin of sports skill. The idea is that skill is a kind of refined actions, how actions are refined according to the tasks and the environments where those tasks are performed. So actions originate actions is an underlying assumption over this talk. But the point that also I would like to make is that maybe this view contrasts with other views that are pervasive in society and in the media. For example, this idea of skill being acquired, which is a sentence I use often, induces that it's something that we start to possess somehow. And in this film, The Matrix, that was really clear that the characters of this film, after linking up to a computer, they acquire world-level martial arts skills, and they start to perform in that way after that instantaneous acquisition. And I think this idea is very pervasive until today. So we assume somehow that we have something, and because of these things that we have, it explains the way we behave and the way we can develop the way our actions in order to become skilled. And there are two main, very coarse-grained approaches to this problem. One says that we are born with these skills, and this idea is based on the assumption that if we optimize these environmental influences, what only justifies our skill is genotype. So this heritability influences the variation of a given phenotype, which is assumed to be related with skill. So from genotype to phenotype, from phenotype to skill. These are the relationships that are studied from this approach. And the interesting thing we can see from this approach is that, in fact, we find lots of meaningful correlations. There is no evidence for a single gene responsible for complex traits of any kind, inclusively sports skills, but we definitely find lots of associations, more than 14,000 associations that are possible between these SNP traits. So this means that there are some things related, but we are far from explaining causally that are these genome-wide approach associations that are responsible for some complex traits. So these phenotypic traces, especially those related with behavior, are very difficult to explain strictly from this point of view. For example, I don't know if you are aware, but for example, such a trait as hate, our hate, which is seen as highly heritable, genetics can explain 1/5 of its variants, and from these 1/5, there are 700 possibilities for it. So it's really much more complex than just genotype explaining a complex trait like any skill in sport. Another pervasive explanation is based on practice. So we are better because we practice. So the idea is that the DNA structure is the same before and after training. So what makes the difference is not DNA, because it is the same. What makes the difference are the deliberate practice activities, as Erickson would put it. And what these deliberate practice activities do is to refine the mediating mechanisms. So this is the key point. And the important question that follows is, what are these mediating mechanisms? We can see that according to how they are explained, for example, in the last book of Erickson, where David participates on it, the mediating mechanisms are situated into these aspects indicating that in a simplification, this advantage this expert advantage is mediated by the elaborate domain-specific mental representations that are involved into planning, anticipation, execution, and evaluation of, in our case, sport tasks. So also here, there is something in the mind of the individuals that explains how they are skilled in a certain activity, in this case, sport activities. This clip captures well this idea. I think artists are very good in capturing complex ideas, and you will see how these bikers solve their problems. So at the moment, how they are solving the problem is not something really skillful for this director, only when it comes to the crossroads. So when it comes to the crossroad, the skill of this biker comes from these mental simulations about what's going to happen next. So what is illustrated here, and it's quite pervasive in nowadays cognitive science, is that there are several mental simulations about our own body movement and the evolving of the environment. We simulate those possibilities, we select one among those based on, for example, Bayesian inference, and then we execute that solution which brings the more utility to what we want to achieve. But as you saw, all this process is a mental process. That's why the biker inclusively stopped cycling. So in short, the skill is in the genes, is well, needs more evidence to say that this is the explanation for skill. There's more than that. I surely accept and see that there are things, important things in genotype that should be considered, but so far we don't know exactly how they are related with complex traits. And I like very much this quote from a geneticist, Yanis Pitsiladis, and he says that in the Lancet journal that the current genetic evidence does not warrant genotyping an individual to establish their ability to run fast, when this trait can be measured far more effectively with a stopwatch. So by measuring the behavior, we are having much more information about if he's a fast runner than by measuring the genotype implied, for example, in the muscle fibers. This is one of the explanations. The other is the skill is in the mind. So this idea that with the mind becomes skilled in anticipating, controlling, and evaluating. Somehow it makes the rest of the person being replaceable. But the key issue, I think, is that when we do something, we all participate. So all of us are in that, not just the nervous system, but the metabolic system, the locomotory system, all of us, and we do something somewhere. So all these constraints should be taken into consideration if you want to understand how we achieve a task goal, something that is how skill is demonstrated. So I think somehow these approaches have in common that they understand skill as something the performer possesses. And possess meaning that there are other things in the body that are not so relevant, because those things, mental representations and certain genotype and a given genotype are the key things, and where the activity happens is not so relevant for the explanation. So I think if we have a good description of what's happening inside of the person, it always will lack how these characteristics of the person achieve certain goals that happen doing something somewhere. So this link should be established since the beginning. So this is from this view, skilled action needs to be seen at the level at the ecological level, meaning that it's a dynamic process at the level of agent environment system, meaning that not just nervous system or the DNA are important, but how all these systems interact with each other inside of the body, and how the entire body with all these interactions interact in an environment where other agents also have all those interactions. So how this complexity of links can explain skill, can explain some stability in accommodating the constraints of a given task. So the complexity, I think, lies in these links. That's why we tend to focus on some of these aspects, which is informative, of course, but it's always partial about what skill is about, from my point of view. So in short, and especially focusing on this idea of information processing, when these more traditional views assume that the behavior is explained by the initial conditions, the athlete or the agent, and how is processing information about the environment, all these processes about active inference, for example, are I think can be seen into this perspective. But this ecological approach raises that this explanation should not be internalized in the individual. It's more how the individual with his own or her own characteristics interacts with the given circumstances to achieve a certain goal. The key difference, I think, is that this approach is more detached. So detached from the situation and disembodied, only part of the body is relevant, for example, the central nervous system, whereas this ecological approach is embedded in the situation and embodied. It's the entire body that participates in the action with all its characteristics, including central nervous systems and height and muscular power. So I think Robert Shaw captured this well when he says that actions are true choice behaviors, because this implies to have a different understanding of actions, not as simply reactions as a behaviorist would put it, and not also as a way of place portions of anatomy in space and time, as a mechanical description of how anatomy changes in time, but more intrinsically functional, meaning that how we are achieving a certain goal, how we are interacting with the circumstances to achieve a certain goal. And this also helps us to understand why the same functions, the same goal is achieved by multiple means. So there's not only one solution to write our name or to grasp a glass. We have multiple ways of doing this according to how we are in a certain moment. And in this sense, actions are not so these implementations of a program, are more adjustments and adaptations of the individual environment system as a whole. So to link with the opening sentence of this slide, this also implies a different understanding of cognition. So not something that happens inside of the head, but this ongoing maintenance, how we solve the problems when we deal with the world. So this ongoing maintenance of a robust player environment system achieved by perception and action. So in this sense, action is very cognitive. It's not just mechanistic, it's cognitive. It's always accommodating and solving the problems that we have, being them locomoting or grasping an object. So it's embedded and embodied. Of course, this view capitalizes a lot on the views from Gibson. It's as much Gibsonian as I can see it. And this implies that we can see that the environment is not something independent of the individual or neutral to the individual. The environment should be understood in behavioral relevant terms. So this is the idea of affordances. We don't perceive the environment as neutral features that we attribute names. We perceive the environment in terms of what we can do with it. This also assumes that there is much more in the environment that we cannot perceive. For example, infrared light or ultraviolet light or ultrasounds, but they are there, but we cannot perceive it, at least without amplifying our perception. This is also has to do that when we perform something, we are not experience objects or people or events or surfaces as they are. We are acting upon the affordances they offer. So there's not this thing of dividing object from subject. We are always acting on the affordances the things offer. So this don't make that distinction that implies a miracle to link objectivity with subjectivity. We are always relating with the environment according to our own characteristics. So we capture the link and not just the endpoints of this link. This is why affordances are sensible to the actions and to the body of the actor. we perceive the things, like this boy perceived this corner as something, some place to climb. This means that from all the landscape of affordance we have near us, we are more sensible to those, that we can act upon them, and we have possibilities of achieving something when we act upon them. So this idea is important because they relate very much to the body as a way to understand affordances. Affordance cannot be understood without the concept of body and effectivities, how we act with how we act in the world. So from this idea, how can we develop action? We develop action, I think, understanding or developing a way of interacting with our world. If we interact in order to achieve something, our actions are always future oriented, not just response to a previous stimuli, but future oriented, meaning that action develops through learning of prospective information. Prospective information is something about the current future, as Reino Bootsma put it. So it's not something that we have to predict in our head and then execute. It's something we can monitor in the environment to act upon it. And by monitoring it, we also know how to adjust in order to intercept it. For example, this player trying to heading that ball towards the goal. So he's using information about the future, about how to interact to intercept that ball. And if we understand this, that information tells us, environmental information tells us how to move, so it also tells us what to do in the circumstances in order to act upon that information. So this is a process that don't put everything inside of the head to tell us how to move. It's how we use information which will guide the way we can accommodate the circumstances where we are in order to achieve a certain goal. There are beautiful studies performed in the University of Amsterdam, for example, Raoul Odiand, but many others like Gert Savelsberg and John van der Kamp. You have done great studies on catching, which shows exactly this information about the future, how it is important to tell us how to move. So from action to skill means that we have to understand why do you call some actions skilled actions? So what is going on these actions to be called skill? If we understand actions as future-oriented interactions with the world, this means that we are always adjusting and using our body in terms of forces, in terms of balances to act upon the information that is available. This means that we capitalize on actions, we develop actions, actions originate actions, actions develop through actions. I think this is a very important idea, meaning that there is no other thing than an entire actualization of the way we act, not simply on the central nervous system, not simply on the muscles, not simply on metabolic system, but everything that is implied with action is developing through actions. Action develops us all, not simply a part of us. Some parts may be more active than others, of course, but it of course will depend on the tasks we are performing. So learning comes, I think, and from many those that are embracing this view, that we learn about how to use these properties of the environment that are stable and those that change, how we are using the information that tells us how to achieve a certain goal. So how we are attuning our perception towards the affordances of the environment that allows us to approximate to a given goal. And this is what can be understood as knowing. So knowing is not knowing about something that I can verbalize about, but I know about how to do a thing when I pick up a glass. So I know how to pick up a glass. I know how to touch an object. I know how to locomote. So this idea of knowing of instead of knowing about is a key idea of how skill develops. We more and more, we are more attuned to the relevant affordances, we are detecting the information that allows us to better achieve a certain goal. And by developing this sensitivity to some aspects of the environment and not to others, and acting upon those aspects, we are becoming to know, to accommodate better those aspects and to be more robust in goal achievement. This is what act skillfully may mean from this point of view. And I think there is a very interesting study that Peter Beck did some years ago and influenced me a lot. And I think it really applies very much to this idea, which says that how do we perceive how to act? It's not an order from the mind to the body to do, but is how we are doing something like juggling, and how these subtle and small changes are accommodated by the way we act, being it the gaze or being it the movement of the hands. So there's always accommodation, being a novice or a skilled juggler, but the accommodations that the skilled juggler can do are much more fine-tuned to the relevant information, but they are always there. So this means that we are not attending to all the affordances that we can, but we are specifying where we are focusing on those that are relevant to the task. This is a very important issue from my point of view, because I think this is what embedded and embodied intentionality means that we are focusing on the affordances that help us to maintain this continuation of the interactions with the environment that allows us to achieve a certain task. So intentionality from this ecological point of view, not as an intention came from the mind, but this maintenance of a certain interaction with the environment, I think plays a key role in this approach to skill. And I'd like to illustrate these ideas to show you an example that just happened some months ago, and she's a Portuguese gymnast, so that's why I also like to show it. And she's Filipa Martins. She performs gymnastics, artistic gymnastics, but she's particularly skilled in uneven bars. And she could gain the place to go to the European Artistic Gymnastics Championships that happened a few months ago. And from June 2020, so this was a few months ago, from June and during 9 months, I think these 9 months is interesting because I'm talking about the origins of something. So this is a nice metaphor about the own human origin. From June 2020 until 9 months later, she began to develop a particular skill that was not known in the uneven bars. And I will talk about this as potentiality, distinguishing possibilities from potentialities from actuality. These will be 3 important words that I will talk about in a few minutes. But so the possibility is that she can go to the European Championships. She gained the place to be there. There's a possibility. And what she's going to do to differentiate her skill. So she started to work on a particular skill for uneven gymnastics. And it was on the 21st of April of 2021, so a few months ago, when there was the qualifying of these European Championships already there. So they have to do the qualifying before they go to the final. That finally the skill was born. Why I'm saying this? Because before that skill didn't exist into uneven bars. So only when it was showed publicly and it has to be coded, that it became to be included in the code of points. So this is why I'm also saying that there is something into skill and into action that is always ecologically defined. In this case, socioculturally defined. Otherwise, this will be just a movement, not a particular skill with a high difficulty that only a few gymnasts can do it. The skill is this one, a Hindorf with mixed grip. I will show you in a minute. So this was the skill, and she was the moment when the skill was born for gymnastics. Before this, no one could code it, and after this moment, it started to be coded with her name. So now it is called Martins skill. It's not this one. You will see it in a more emphasized way. It starts now, and it is this change. These 2 changes that she did, you will see it now in more slow motion. I hope you will see it well. We never know when showing videos in Zoom if they are going okay. I hope they are going okay. This is the entire choreography, but at the end you will see the particular skill. So now she's landing on the mat, and the new skill, as it was noticed everywhere, is this Hindorf with mixed grip and half turn. So this turn, this mixed grip, and then the change to the lower bar. Well, the interesting thing was that she shows what she did during these 9 months. And what you can see here is how from an action is becoming a potentiality, how she's gaining more attunements to crucial spatial temporal constraints that allow her to do, and how she's acting on that information, how she's calibrating to that information. So you see that also the conditions in the environment are changing from a more soft landing pits. She's moving to more protected places to less protected places. And she's also with the soft mats protecting some of her movements. And you see that sometimes she can do it, some other times she cannot. Sometimes she does it, but it breaks the movement. And the interesting thing is that you see how she's evolving over time from this clip that she shared. So the interesting thing is that the coach is really protecting the particular places in the environment, not all the places, but only a few, that allow her to always have the information she needs to do the skill, but also for her to don't be distracted with other affordances. For example, safety affordances. So she's not concerned with that. But some things happened, like now she damaged her foot. And then she recovered and she started again. And as you see, she still has many broken movements. So it's difficult to continue the movement after she performs the skill. And she's trying to do some things before the skill and then perform the skill and then continues. Now she's emphasizing what she's doing before, and the things are becoming more smooth, meaning that she's finding the information that allows her to continue the movement. It is the first time that she is now performing outside of the soft landing pit. So this is not only a landing mat with more soft mats than usual, but meaning that other affordances that could distract her, like safety affordances, are not here, are being excluded, only to become progressively in the conditions of the competition. And also the coach is changing the places where she is doing it, so not only always in the same place. Now you see that she's, after the skill, she is also continuing, so she's not breaking the movement, she is already starting to continue it. So you see how these processes of information and calibration, of attunement and calibration, are developing over time. Things that happen before the skill, things that happen after the skill, and all how these very severe time constraints are being acted upon over time. From a huge range of possibilities, she's evolving towards making a concrete action more possible to exist. So this is what may be seen as a potentiality. So she's becoming more and more attuned to the relevant information, accommodating the variation of constraints that happen in every repetition. And this accommodation is increasing the potentiality to perform better in the next occasion. It's very rare that we have all these sequence, but I think maybe because of her own interest in learning, she's a student of physical education in Porto. Maybe because of her own interest, she filmed all this sequence, and you are clear seeing how things are evolving over time. So this is the first time that she's doing the complete choreography, and she's just less than 1 month before the competition, the European Championships. You still see that there are some forces that are not really being calibrated by her. So from possibility, I would like to do this. From potentiality, she's knowing how to do it, how to accommodate the severe time constraints and to act upon those constraints. And until the situation where she has to perform. And this is the situation. This is the first time she's showing publicly. It's called the podium training. So it's not really the competition, but it's the first time the jury is seeing what she's going to do. So it was because they can see it before, then they can code it when it's the qualifying, which in this case was the next day. And then this was the day when the skill was officially named Martins skill, when she performed it, and she was punctuated specifically for this skill. Well, what I've been trying to tell you is that how action developed into a skilled action. So it's the idea of mastering the available means to accomplish an end. And these means go much beyond the internal organism. Without the information of the bar, she could not perform what she's doing. So there is more things than what's happening inside of the organism. For moving from possibility, something that you can do and you have the conditions to do, from to how to accommodate the specific constraints of that situation until you perform it in competitions situations, for example. So I think the three processes, and based on many other research, for example, David Jacobs, Hertz, Savelsberg's research, and many others, the idea of education of intention, so this idea of exploring the possibilities until there is a specific path to explore. It's what she did before the 9 months, and when she got the possibility to participate in the Europeans. This has to do also very much into also intentionality. How can I act upon this situation and maintain it? Is this this is the path that I would like to develop in the next months. This perceptual attunement concerning the information that should be acted upon, and of course how you are acting on that information. So how that information is regulating your torques and your movements and your forces. The interesting thing that I'd like to show you is that although this development that you just saw, and you see from my point of view that her potentiality increased in 9 months, but in the final I show you the qualifyings when she performed the skill. But now this is the final the day after, and she was in the second place. So in the qualifying she becomes the second, so she could have the podium, and now she's going to perform in the final. Of course, there were 10,000 Portuguese people looking to this event. It was a Sunday. And exactly on the moment of performing her skill, she didn't accommodate the specific constraints of the competition, and she fell down. So she was the last one in the final. So she was the 12th player in the 12 that were selected to the final. So this was 3 days after, sorry, not 1 day, but 3 days after. So the idea is that it's important to distinguish potentiality from actuality. So a theory of skill is different from a theory of performance, which has to do with accommodation of specific constraints. And this is different from to learning how to use the information and act upon that information, as we've seen over time. There is an interesting reflection about this made by Robert Shaw and colleagues, that they show that this view helps to accommodate this cascade of constraints from multiple constraints, and then you reduce them until you are actually performing. From a bare possibility, I would like to be in the Europeans, to the real possibility. In the case of Filipa, she could gain the place to be in the European. So this we are talking about possibilities, is what affordances are, but then how we act upon these affordances. And I think this is what potentiality is about, and this link between affordances and skills or effectivities cannot be dissociated. So the conditions that must hold for the performers to coordinate their acts with a given circumstances. This is what they know, what they need to know from this embodied perspective. So not knowing about, but knowing of. And finally, performance, who has to do with specific constraints of the situation. So in the specific constraints of the final, she could not accommodate that. But this does not disclosure the potentiality she gained over 9 months. And this is different from mere possibilities. So this is why these two processes are so important. Information about constraints, so the particular patternings of the structured energy distribution that are generated when the performing is acting, and how he should specify their actions to act upon those space-time constraints. So by performing epsilon is possible only if information about epsilon is available. So this is what are the conditions, and actors, of course, can detect it. And a very known example is tau, for example, how this particular patterning of optical energy specifies what needs to be done to reach the bar, for example. So it's a lawful generated property. And the important thing that I like here is that this is independent of nervous system sophistication. So the information of the bar, without the bar being there, no nervous system in the world could perform that. So this always has to do with this environmental information. So to understand skill, we cannot solely focus on a part of the body. And action dynamics, of course, the movements involved in skill involve many degrees of freedom. So it's a question of what is constraining them, and what the ecological suggestion is that what is constraining them is the information about which we should act upon. So the constraints came from this link with the environment and not an internal organization, for example, as Bernstein proposed it. But as Turvey also amplifies towards the constraining of degrees of freedom has to do with information and circumstances available. And also that model I showed you about that Robert Shaw and colleagues presented is also about that. It's the constraining of degrees of freedom comes from this system, this actor environment system level. Although this systems dynamic can be describable in a space, in a state space of many dimensions, this control is only made in a few dimensions. And there are wonderful works by many people from Amsterdam showing that these order parameters can explain the majority of the variance of what is being done. And so the key issue here is that this goes much beyond what's happening inside of the organism. It has to do with this ecological lawfulness of these circumstances that allow these actions to be performed. And they cannot be explained strictly if we just focus on central nervous system or muscles or internal aspects of the body. I'd like to show you some modeling we did on this in this case about a rugby tackle. You see here a tackle. So one player tackling the other very effectively. So the opponent with the ball was tackled in the way that he even moved back. So he lose the proximity to the try zone. So we create several conditions about this, and then we model them. And the variable, the compressional dimension that we found to capturing this idea was this variable here. So you see, this is the try line, this is the defender, this is the attack. I don't know if you see me, I will change my pointer. Let me see. Oh, I cannot find the pointer. Yeah, it's here. So this is the try line. This is a parallel to the try line. This is the defender. This is the attacker. So you create a vector that links the defender with the attacker. And this is an angle between the attacker and defender and the try line. So this variable, this angle between the attacker and defender and the try line capture this system because it's related with the try line. It's related with the attacker and with the defender. So the tackles that we just see in the example is a 90 degrees tackle, where the defender makes the attacker going even back. It maintains the 90 degrees position. When the attacker is passing the defender, for example, when he passes, it's 0 degrees. And when he's behind the defender, it's 270 or minus 90 degrees when he moves to the try line. So based on this idea, we did several repetitions or several repetitions of this several tries of this task with players, and we described them as you can see here. There was mainly three tendencies, three attractors, if you want. One is that when there is a try, we see here in the red light, so the angles didn't changed very much from the 90 degrees. In the black line, there was a try. Sorry, he was a tackle. It was the defender could tackle the attacker. Here it was a try when the attacker could pass the defender and make a try. And here it was a kind of middle term. It was the attacker could pass. The attacker was tackled, but he passed the defender. He gained some proximity to the try line in this third one. So we modeled this as a three attractor model with two control parameters. Those were the interpersonal distance and the difference in velocity between the attacker and defender. And with this model, we could explain what we found in the experimental data, but also we could show that there was several moments of multi-stability, or I think, and this is more argumentative, that there's also what can be called, and this is the important point I'd like to raise, metastability. So several possibilities that are kept open until there is something that allows to go into one direction and not to the other. So this multi-stability also was somehow possible due to the variability that was introduced in the model, and this variability we think is not simply random. It has to do with how the attacker is perceiving the information of the defender. Even though that we model it as white noise, but it can be, it was not random in this probabilistic sense. We could see that there is a distribution towards these possibilities, but we saw that there was some movement that allows the player to go from one side to the other. And this is more descriptive, what I'm just saying. But the key point that I'd like to emphasize is that there may be room for capturing what is metastable. And this is different from multi-stable. Multi-stable means that you go directly for one of the possibilities. If you just have one, you are monostable. If you have one of the three, you are multi-stable. But there is some room where you are not exactly in that situation, and it's kept more time before you enter in a certain regime. And we think this is a hallmark of expertise. That's why I'm also mentioning this point here. So for example, metastability in opening the door, this is an example my good friend Ludovic Sefer offered me. Open the door, so there is one solution, but then you can find other solutions if the circumstances change, like in this case, you change the arm for opening the door, or in this case that both arms are used, you find another solution to do the same function. So the same functions are really realizable by multiple means, and even other solutions that can come up until in new situations, you also find other solutions without no problem. So this means that actions are not strictly the execution of a program, but how you are accommodating the possibilities and you are open to them. So in this case, this analogy, this metaphor towards metastability is this openness to find unique solutions that each circumstance may offer you. So this has to do with the intentionality. What you can perceive in where you are is according to the task. The task circumscribes a lot what you are perceiving and what you are not. From the things that are on the task, you can perceive some things more than the others. It was what the coach did with Felipe Martins. So you make you more open to some affordances and not to the others. And how you act upon them also show you, also can be described, can be captured by this dynamical description of your behavior. So skill, perception, and action. The circumstances that are in the case of visual information, like the uneven bars, informs about what can be done kinematically. So information will not change your mass, so you have to act upon them. But this is how information is linked into action, because then the flow and forces are intervening in the way they are influencing each other. So that's why perceive in order to move, and move in order to perceive. This is how kinematics and kinetics can be interrelated according to this perspective. So a good example, it was done recently by Mattis, who showed that running on the path of irregularly spaced stepping stones was adjusted, the stride length was adjusted, and how this adjustment happens in order to prevent a fall. So it was mainly by vertical impulse but this vertical impulse was modulated by tau. So how we were approaching, or the intensity of this vertical impulse was according to your distance or proximity, or how further away you were from a given stone. So this idea of information modeling, how you can act, is a good example of the point that I was telling you. So learning more about how to use better information and how to act upon the information is what skillful action is about from my point of view. And I'd like to finalize by showing some work that I'm doing, and this is, well, a kind of descriptive work. I'm working with Patricia Mamona. She has done an incredible career in the triple jump. She was just European indoor champion in triple jump in March or April. It was about that. And how can I have a discussion with this with her coach, for example? So I would like to show you the jump she just did. She is 33 years old. So she's not a young athlete, she's 33 years old, and she did the best jump of her life in this last March. So it was when she became the European championship. The best jump indoor. She has a better mark outdoor, but indoor it was the national record and her own record, and this made her become champion. She already did 2 very good jumps with 14:35, 14:38. She's not happy because she's changing her running. She's becoming much more fast in how she's running nowadays. So she doesn't know exactly the sensations of the hop, step, and jump mean to her. That's why she thought it was a very low jump, but it was not. It was the best jump she did inside. So her feelings were different from what she did. This is also an important point, because many times it's just based on what the athlete says, and this is very different what she did. This was the jump, and how can I say to the coach that how Patricia will perform in the Olympics? It's what the coach and the Track and Field Federation asked me. What I showed them was the possibilities that exist, and I compared the different marks of Patricia in different scenarios. In the Olympic Games, the first one, in the Diamond League, in the Indoor World Championships, Outdoor World Championships, European Indoor Championships, European Outdoor Championships. And those conditions where she has better marks are in the Olympics. So this is a good sign. There's good possibilities. And their marks in red are better from the average of the final 8. So in these competitions, there are only 8 that do the 6 jumps. So I call this the finalists. So she is better in average than those. But this is just a possibility. This is just a probability. The other thing more related with potentiality is showing that she's really consistently increasing how much she jumped year after year from these last 10 years. She's consistently jumping. Her lower mark is better than what she did in previous year. So there is some potential accumulated. But what about actuality? This has to do with the Olympics itself. But what did I show to the coach? This is the best mark of the year over the last 10 years. This is the best mark of Patricia, wherever the context. So it is the best, absolute best marks of the year, the best marks of Patricia, and the average of the 8 finalists in the major competitions over the years. So what we can show is that the best marks of Patricia are better than those of the finalists in the competition, which is a good signal. But they are not the best marks of the year. She never did the best mark of the year. And the specificities of the competition should be taken in consideration. And there are some unique things in the Olympics, like we don't know the public that will be there. We know that will be Japanese, but not much more than that. The number of people is still in discussion. We know that there's a lot of humidity. There's the high temperatures above 30 degrees. How she will accommodate these things, we cannot test it now. But these are some of the ingredients that we try to elaborate for the coach to make her become more attuned to these specific constraints. But actuality has to do with the specific constraints of the competition. So it is not explained simply by potentiality. This was also what I shared with the coach. So just to finalize, how do we learn a skill? It has to do with intentionality for organizing the situation in such a way that some affordances are relevant and soliciting action to maintain this ongoing interaction, as Felipe Martins showed. The environment is constitutive of behavior, so behavior cannot be explained just based on what's happening inside of the body, and this has to do, a key characteristic is attunement, how attunement to specific spatial time constraints are developed on time, and how this attunement is acted upon. And I think that the key characteristic of being accommodated uniqueness of each performance has to do with this metastable regime, but this is more speculative than any other thing because there is no, I cannot show you evidence for this. This is just an intuition that I'd like to share with you. And well, several of these things that we wrote in this book, but this is really the main message that I'd like to share with you. And thank you very much. I took much more time than that told Hertz that I would take. Sorry, I was talking about all these interesting things and I lost time. Sorry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay. Have to do with my applause only. Great talk, Duarte. And well, I didn't realize that you took a little bit more time. People in the chat, if you just mention in the chat that you want to give a talk, want to ask a question, and then I give you the floor. Who I can give first? I cannot imagine that John van der Kamp and Peter Beek have no questions.
Yes, I have some questions.
Oh, okay, go ahead, Peter.
Well, first of all, Duarte, very nice to see and hear you again. And also very nice to see your thinking progress on these marvelous topics. So thank you for your very inspiring lecture. I have a number of points. First, of course, in relation to the juggling example. What I think is very interesting there is that what is relevant information, especially for the expert juggler, is in a sense created by the juggler himself in the task space of juggling. So what becomes relevant is how the balls move relative to a self-selected virtual point in space. Namely, that is where the jugglers want to throw the ball and they select that point, or they have a vantage point nearby where they can arrange their perceptual attunement. So it is in a sense in the environment, but it's also in the task. It is a task solution that the juggler can come up with to do. So the way the actor defines the task or sets up an intentional space for performing the task can also define what is relevant information. And the task itself can have more solutions that are possible to achieve. In juggling, there's a whole mathematical theory of juggling patterns that are possible in principle, but that not all humans can perform. This is called the side swap notation, and it has led to some wonderful solutions. People didn't know they could perform them, but they could. But others are so difficult that they simply cannot perform them. What is crucial here, I think, is that the task itself may be deserving of a little bit more emphasis. So it's not simply the environment, but it's the task and the task space in which you can come up with those solutions. So that would be my first point. Maybe you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Peter. It's always a pleasure to see you and also to hear your comments. Well, I think I fully agree with you. My idea of environment, maybe I emphasize too much this word, but I think it's the appropriate description should be at the task level. By saying task, we are always also including those aspects of what needs to be performed that are with interaction with the ball, with the gravity, right. Yes. With posture. So I think for this point that I want to make, I think we are in fully agreement. I just emphasize generally environment.
No, I understand. Yeah, it's part of the environment, but it doesn't, my point is it doesn't need to be even object bound, or texture bound. It can be just in the head, but still in the environment. So one definition in juggling is, why bother what the head is inside of, if you can arrange the space yourself to come up with the right solution.
But this space is always according to the properties of the balls or the objects you are juggling and to your own posture and gravity.
Yeah, but that becomes very abstract. Because it doesn't matter what the objects are, it doesn't matter what instances are doing the juggling. So there's something about the task of juggling that brings along those solutions.
Yeah, I see. But yeah, this has to do with the proper definition of the task itself.
Yes.
I think I understand what you mean, and I agree that the task level is the appropriate level. I don't think that the task solution is something in the head. I think it always has to do with property. Yeah.
Second point, it's just an open question. I mean, you're emphasizing this prospective control aspect. So the action is unfolding, and it is, of course, future-oriented. But if I have a look at the literature and also some personal experiences, I think there may be quite some individual variation in how actors are future-oriented. So let me give you an example. I did an exercise with Jonathan Edwards. Now you were talking about the triple jump. Now he's still the world record holder in the triple jump with a 60 feet triple jump world record. And I did an experiment with him because there was this whole literature on how do you proceed towards the final line from which you have to take off, right?
Yeah.
And most athletes, they are running up to the line and then are accommodating their stride lengths to make sure that they have the right setup position. He didn't do that. He could do the run blindfolded, measure his steps, work for a completely predictive model, and make sure he could do this so well that at each instant, there was only a small, maybe fractions of a centimeter difference where he placed his final foot. So this is not an example of prospective control, I would say, but of predictive control.
Yeah, the way you describe it really looks like...
I think a danger might be that we are overlooking these individual differences and how they come up with those task solutions.
Well, I'm a big admirer of Jonathan Edwards. He was really amazing. He is a jumper that even came later in his activities. I think when he beat the world record, he was 35 or something like that.
Yeah.
And he's still outstanding. So
he's doing things differently. So my point is,
I understand what you mean. It's very interesting. I have to believe in what you're saying, and I think it would be nice.
It's anecdotal evidence. I didn't measure it all.
Exactly. No, but I understand what you mean. And in fact, in this coach area, there are coaches that fully believe, and maybe they are right, according to your example, that the athlete really need to memorize their strides. My view is that it's more complex than that, but I cannot counter your evidence.
No, okay. No, but still, I think it's quite clear from the measurements that there are considerable individual differences in the solution.
And why do I think that also these variants may also happen, and it's purely speculative, with such a consistent people like Jonathan Edwards, because even the tracks have different elasticities. So there is also some kind of adjustment that they have to do. But of course, we are just talking without evidence.
That brings me to my third point. I have more points, but I stick to three because I could also ask questions. But you can say, okay, actions are highly contextualized and dependent on the environment and other agents and things like the underground or the weather and all those things. Yeah. But if I make recordings of Federer or Djokovic and I dynamically stylize those performances, and I have a neural network that I train to capture their actions, at least in terms of the pattern of the movements, then it's highly identifiable. So in other words, even although all these circumstances change, you can tell a stroke from Federer differentiate that from a stroke from Djokovic. There will be no mistake in that. Even if the tennis player is making a completely new stroke, it's still the case.
Yeah, well, I fully know the evidence about this individuality and how you can capture the individuality of players with neural networks, for example, or machine learning. Or what I think, well, this is just my comment. I like very much the work Reino Bootsma did when he was there for his PhD. So he was showing that these invariants are according to accommodate those spatial temporal constraints independently of how other aspects implied in the gesture. So it was that window of when to act that is kept constant. And well, this is also at the task level. It is not something strictly individual.
Gibson, he was talking about persistence and change. So this is an instance of persistence and change. So there's something about the strokes of Federer that is persistent, regardless of all these changes.
Yeah, but I think at the task level, not simply on his anatomy, but at the task level.
No, it's not simply at his anatomy, but it is at the level. It's at the that's then what you mean. It's also in the movement pattern as it unfolds in the actions that he's engaged.
Yeah, but I think in this point. Yeah, I see. I think it's, if we consider this at the task level, including that there is this spatial time constraints that are kept the persistence. I think you are showing more details that should be clarified, but I think the general points I fully agree with them.
It's just the points that came up. I have some more, but let's others also bring.
Thank you, Peter, very much. Thank you very much.
Well, is there somebody else who wants to ask a question? Otherwise, we give the word back to Peter. Somebody else.
I have one other point about the meta stability, which is an interesting notion, of course, and I also like. But I see a difference. I mean, there are different approaches to this. Of course, you have the way synergy is being defined in coordination dynamics in vis-a-vis order parameters. But there's also a definition of synergy in terms of cooperation between elements aimed towards achieving a certain task goal, where the task goal is part of the definition of the synergy. Well, in other cases, it's not. And I found the idea that, a skilled actor is also skilled in terms of the knowledge that the actor has about particular task spaces. And this is not explicit knowledge, but this is exploiting the aspects of the task space to the max. So knowing where, let's say, Go equivalent solutions are, or knowing regions in task space where you can be rather robust against perturbations from the outside. So it's a slightly different tack on the notion of meta stability, because now you're bringing the task success into the equation.
And I like very much the way you are putting it. I think this has to do with something we know only a little, which is intentionality, that you are putting yourself in the circumstance, that you are exploring it somehow. So your knowledge of it indicates that that space can be better to explore than another one. And so metastability and intentionality being so linked. But intentionality, I think it's a very ill-studied concept, and the traditional way of understanding it is very much internalized, and I really don't want to go into that direction, but I like the way you put it in. If we understand metastability in terms of task goal, I think we are also embedding intentionality into it. It's a very interesting notion to take a look. I will look into that approach of synergies.
And related there to the point, which I always find a very interesting question, is that of creativity. Yeah, we know all kinds of examples. For instance, football players like Ibrahimovic or Dennis Bergkamp is another example. They are marvelous players, but they're also marvelous because they come up with solutions that they have never practiced before or never practiced quite like the way they perform it. And they have a high success rate with those, and they are never repeated again. So, but that also comes in the realm of expertise, doesn't it?
I think so. Well, my hope will be that this way of approaching skill always allow creativity to exist and not constrain the learning in a way that is to find already known solution. So I think this idea
but should that done, if you talk about the origin of skill, should that not then the origin of creativity not part of the theory?
Very good. Yeah. I didn't start it in that way. It's a good way. Yeah, indeed. I think it's maybe search for the origin of a skill is a narrow way of looking into it. We are already restraining to one direction. Interesting. Never started in that way.
Okay. Okay. Can I interrupt a little bit? Another guy who wants to ask a question. That is David. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll break it up. I'm interested, you presented, I think, this cascade of constraints where, if I understood it right, there's a decrease in the degrees of freedom as we become more proficient in the task. I'm interested in how you reconcile that with like the Bernsteinian idea where you start by freezing degrees of freedom when you first learn a skill and then unfreeze them with time. How do you reconcile those two ideas? Yeah, well, it's precisely into that direction. Bernstein was very much looking into biomechanical degrees of freedom, but there's much more into action than the biomechanical or the body degrees of freedom. So the idea was that all these degrees of freedom that constrain movement should be accommodated in a theory, should be considered in a theory. And in this way, and also the way that Robert Shaw and his colleagues put it, is precisely to see that how action happens goes beyond the individual and the environment. It's when both goes together and goes into this sense of moving from possibilities to potentiality to actuality. I think the main difference towards the freezing and the freezing is that there is they emphasize more that there is something before freezing, that there may be other solutions, that may be exploration and search, which are not necessarily just about freezing. But of course, we know that several solutions, individual solutions, go into freezing, and the Bernstein approach capture it well. I think freezing is maybe not on the first one, but some of the processes that can happen in the between, and it's one possible solution, not the only solution. But indeed, the way of how we exploit the reactive forces, as Bernstein would put it, are more related with potentiality and actuality. Thanks. Cool. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Duarte. Well, I must admit, I never understood anything what Bob Shaw was talking about. I understand you. And congratulate everybody who understands him. Maybe I had not enough drinks to have that. But I thought you had a very nice, clear talk with examples. If there's no urgent question anymore, I would say thank you very much for this nice presentation. And well, see you next time. Hope to see you soon again back in Amsterdam.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for inviting me, Gert.
Applause once more for me. Of course, everybody else.
Thank you, Duarte.
Thank you, Peter. Wonderful questions.
And there's some thank yous in the chat for you. Okay.
Okay. Now I'm seeing them.
Message to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, guys.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Spain, on Spain, John, Italy.